Well, folks, welcome to another episode of the Noble Man Podcast. I'm pretty excited about this. Some of you who follow us know that my oldest son has three children. He's got two sons and a new daughter. My youngest son, who got married last May, his wife is pregnant with their first daughter in September. So I am watching in my family young men become dads for the first time. And our guest today is Steven Kolberg. Steven's with us from the Denver area, and he's written a book called Reviving Fatherhood. And it's really focused on some of the questions and challenges that young dads face. So, Steven, welcome to the Noble Man Podcast. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate getting to sit down and talk to you.
Yeah, well, great fun. Well, let's start with where you are in your fathering journey, because that's something that you and I talked about previously, and it's just kind of, I think it's awesome for where you are to have written this book. So tell me where you are in your fathering journey.
Yeah, so I'm actually on the younger end. My oldest is a 6-year-old boy named James. My middle is a daughter. She's 3, and her name's June. And then my 1.5-year-old, spunky as could be, she's Jovi. She is definitely third child, like crazy. Like the first two, I thought I knew what I was doing. The third one, I'm like, it's all fair game from here.
Isn't it amazing how they can all have the same mom and dad, same environment, completely different?
Oh, absolutely. And I love it, though. That's one of the joys of like all the different kids and all the different personalities.
That's true. Yep, for sure. So what is the greatest joy of being a dad?
The greatest joy that I have found so far in being a dad is the gift of being able to raise children that like God has given me. You know, because ultimately they're God's children, and the blessing to be able to sit with God and be like, God, okay, you gave me these kids. Now let's raise them together. And just the joy of having that relationship with my children and knowing that's how God has his relationship with me as his child, and kind of just seeing that full circle. That is probably one of the greatest joys whenever I get like in the hard moments. I think about that often. I was like, okay, I'm his child, and he's given me his children to steward and look after as well. And that really like relieves a lot of moments where it's just really hard. But that is something that definitely brings me so much joy, is just thinking about them being God's children and having that gift.
Yeah, it's crazy that the Lord would entrust such precious treasure to us. I always think that's a wonderful realization. So you're fairly young in your fathering journey. So your children are 6, 3, and I think you said 18 months. So that's, I've heard someone say that people without kids write parenting books. People who have kids write books on prayer. And so you're a young dad who's written a book on fathering. Tell us about how you come to write a book on fathering as such a young father. I mean, your experience, many people would look at this and say your experience is fairly limited, but you do have a perspective that's valuable to share. So unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So it all started, and I was actually in the shower up in Aspen, Colorado, sitting there soaping my hair, and this is after a moment of reflection and prayer that morning. And the thought that has been plaguing my mind for a long time is I should write a book. And the biggest fight that I always had was, who am I to write a book? You know, I'm young. It's like I've only had a couple kids at this point. And so there's no reason for me to do that. And so when I'm in the shower, scrubbing my hair, I finally said, okay, yes, I'm going to do it. Because what was really heavy on my heart was, what was I hoping to have at the time of having kids that I wish I could have read? And so right into the 3-4 years ago me, it was like, hey, if someone could have handed you a book that taught you, hey, here's kind of some of the biggest changes, here's what you can guide you, and here's some of the fundamentals that you had to learn the hard way in the first few years. How about you write about that? Write about what you wish you had. And so after that shower, I was like, okay, let's do this. And so then that began the journey of writing the book and sitting down. And I think one of the hardest parts was I had to really think about, what did I learn? And what were the big pieces? Because I feel like there was many things that could have made it into this book. And I had to isolate it down to just like, what were some of the core principles that I heard 1,000 times, but now it's my turn to apply them. And that was the exciting challenge of writing this book.
That's awesome. Well, let's look at this in the parts, because you've got 3 parts to your book and 3 parts to your thinking about this. So the first one is key players, then priority management, and then tools for success. So when you think about fathering as a young dad, you've already talked about the recognition that Father God has entrusted you with this precious gift. So certainly one of the key players. I unpack that whole section of the book. So first 3 chapters that talk about who are the actors in the play here, in the scene.
Yeah, I like to look at it as kind of like a story, or there's a field map and we have the different characters that are on it. And the big 3 characters that I came up with are God, us, and our kids, where God is the ultimate father, that when we look at him and his character, because he created everything, how can we start aligning our lives to be like, okay, God, this is how you said that you created the world. This is how you created us to be dads. This is how you show that you are a father yourself to us, your children. And how can we emulate that in our parenting and in our who we are as dads? And then I move more into like, okay, once we have this understanding of who God is, we kind of understand like who you are. So I write lightly about what I've learned about who we are as God's children, in fact, and how that just really has a big play. If you don't understand who you are, how are you ever supposed to make any changes in the first place? And then when you think about like our kids, like I mentioned earlier, like our kids are gifts from God that we get to steward and take care of. And that's one of the biggest pieces of advice and pieces of wisdom I ever got. And it wasn't until I had kids that I realized how true that was. And then I reflect on like the joy that brings that I get to do this. But writing that out and putting words into paper and be like, wow, this has to become a core belief. And I forget this all the time. I've heard this phrase a lot, Christian amnesia, where you learn something and you know about it, but you seem to forget it. And so that's actually something I just learned a few weeks ago. I was listening to a pastor talking and he reminded me, I'm like, they're God's children. I was like, yeah, they are. I even wrote about that. It's something I wouldn't think I forget, but like I feel like we always need that reminder of like there's God's children. And so when you take those 3 key players of God, ourselves, and our kids, that's kind of what I can see as kind of just like the baseline of fatherhood, because it's God, the ultimate father, it's us as fathers, and then it's kids who made us a father.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think about is we are, in the work that we do as dads, we're training our sons to be dads. And boy, that's a crazy realization too. I don't think we cast enough vision for our children for, one day when you're a husband and when you're a father, or when you're a wife and you're a mommy, my goodness, kids need to hear that, because they need to have that spoken over them, I think. Now, let me go back to you as a character in this story, or as a player, because the Bible says that the Lord disciplines those he loves. And so, boy, one of my experiences as a dad was to recognize that when my children would frustrate me or disappoint me, and I knew that I needed to confront them or deal with the situation, it was awkward. I didn't want to. But I have to discipline them. And then I remember, I'm a son of Father God, and he disciplines me, and he's disappointed with my behavior, and he has to step into my life in some uncomfortable ways at times. So does that resonate with you? Have you had those aha moments when you've had to push into some discipline or some correction, and you think, I'm doing this because I love my child, and the Lord does this to me, albeit in different ways, because he loves me?
Definitely. I would definitely say that. I would say one of the stories that quickly just comes to my head is in the midst of me bringing correction to my children. I even write this in the book, where I've struggled with really just getting angry really fast. And it is one of the hardest things for me. And in the midst of correcting my children is like, hey, you know what? I got to correct this behavior. And then honestly just feeling really bad about it, because I'm like, I love you, I don't know why I'm doing this, but then going back to what you said of like, God corrects me, and then realizing that in that moment of me providing correction, like there's an issue going on in my life that I'm like, I think God wants to like correct this too. I find myself in that place a lot, where I'm trying to correct my kids and I'm struggling with the behavior that like anger and control, that I'm like, oh, I know my father is trying to correct me about this too. And I feel like it's like a triple whammy almost, or a double whammy at the same time. But that's very common in my life with raising my kids. But the thing that helps me really push through is exactly what you said is, God corrects me because he loves me, and he allows either things to happen or he brings things, and it's for my good to teach me to walk in his way. And that's what a perfect father does. And so if I want to emulate that, I need to transition that to my kids, and I need to push through my feelings and my emotions and reflect what God does to me, to my children. And I don't do that perfectly. It's super hard, but it's a constant reminder I need to give myself to keep pressing on and doing it, especially since I know I love my son, I love my daughters, and it's for them that I'm doing this.
In the midst of this, there's a country song that occurred to me just a moment ago. I think the line is, I'm starting to see my father in me. And so he talks about seeing his biological dad in the way that he does life. And so I find myself often doing things that my dad did, some things that he did that I really like, some things that he did that I would rather change in my life. And so, but then we have to see ourselves becoming more like God the Father, and seeing that form in us. But let me go back to your relationship with your dad. And so do you find yourself leaning into fathering examples the way that he did it, or do you lean away from those, or is it a mixed bag? How was that experience for you as a biological child relating to your biological dad, your earthly father?
Yeah, so fascinating that you mentioned this. I'm adopted from about 18 months old. And so my adopted dad he's my dad. So I would consider him my biological dad, and I can give you this adoption story. But that's actually a big play in this fatherhood journey that I'm on and behind is I've noticed, and I'm going to give like big shout out to my dad here. Like God brought me to like the most wonderful dad in the whole world. I couldn't have been brought into a household with a more like God-fearing man who's teaching you the values of God and walks out his faith, even when it's imperfect, being willing to admit it and ask forgiveness. And I am just beyond blessed. My mom too. But in the sense of my dad, there's 90% that I'm like, hey, let me reflect that. 10%, he was trying to figure it out as he went. 10% I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to adjust that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to lean more toward this. But one of the biggest things that he taught me is acts of service. He would be the first one to lay down his life for all his friends, for his kids, for my mom. And he hammered that into us as children. He said, like, serving, practically serving, pulling me along on any serving thing that we did. I remember specifically when we were little, my mom was working as a nurse, so long 12-hour shifts. At the end of his day, when he would come home, he would pack us all up in the car. He would get my mom food and flowers. We would drive all the way across town to the hospital she was working at, and he would just leave a love note, some flowers and the food there. Sometimes he would take it in to go see her and say hi. But after his long day, when he's tired and worn out, has all 3 kids, he still goes out of his way to show his wife service. And it's little stories like that that my dad has done in so many different ways that has really impacted me in my parenting and my way that I view fatherhood. And I look at, as I learned and just been studying God a lot, is service is a big one in the kingdom of heaven. Like the greatest in the kingdom is that of a servant. And so having that reflected from my dad, it was probably one of the greatest gifts of many things that he's offered me. But that is the one that I come back to probably the most often every day. I find myself exhausted. I find myself not wanting to make dinner or help the kids do the other craft or help them start reading, and I'm just like, wow, like my dad served me. God serves. God teaches us to serve. I'm wiped out, but let me go ahead and serve because I was shown how to by a great dad.
That's huge. And again, you notice that your dad did that, so your children will notice that you are doing that, or we can assume that, hope that, yeah, for sure. So that's a big deal because they are going to be more likely to follow the example of what they see rather than the lecture that you may give to them. So that is a big deal. I can't tell you how many young dads I've heard make the comment that I realize he's starting to say things that I say. I've got to be more careful about what I say, and he's paying attention to things that are on television. And so you realize that when someone's watching, there's some accountability there, and we shouldn't forget that the Lord is watching. I mean, he's keeping an account. We've all got to give an account for our behaviors, for our choices, for our actions and inactions. So there's a lot there. Well, let's move part 2 in your book. You title Priority Management. There are 3 chapters there. So you talk about relationships and routines and some other things. So what's this section about here that you call Priority Management?
Yes. So when fatherhood became my world, and actually this is shortly even after I got married too. So I was in the thick of going from growing up, single, moved out, graduated college, and quickly got married because we got pregnant a year later, year and a half, we had our first son. And so I was in the midst of even still figuring out marriage, and then I stacked childhood on top of it or parenting on top of it. And I realized that I could not live my life the same way that I could a single guy as a dad now to a kid and wanting to be a husband to my wife. And so it made me go back to the Bible and other resources and other men in my life and be like, what do you do? What have you guys said? What does the Bible say? And the clearest format I could find is kind of what I call like a relationship waterfall, where every day we're interacting with different people. There's relationships between everybody, you know, my coworkers, my wife, my kids, my neighbors, or my small group, depending on which day it is. We're always interacting with different people. So how do we know what to prioritize? When do I choose my kid over like my friends? When do I choose my wife over my kids? And that's a big conversation many dads have is, you know, like, hey, my kid, he can't take care of himself. Like my wife can go get her own water, you know? And so after studying this in the relationship waterfall is I really helped me settle down on, hey, my relationship with God, that's the most important, you know? And it's like walking with God, as I reflected earlier in this podcast with, in order to become the father like that God has like designed us to be, we need to spend time with our Father. You know, you are who you hang out with, as they say. And so, like, realizing we got to spend time with God. We got to take care of ourselves as that classic, I hate this analogy, but I even put it in my book. It's the airplane mask. You know, if the plane's going down, they're like, hey, fix your oxygen first before you can help somebody else. You know, and I recently went through that. Last Friday, I was fried and burnt out from taking care of my kids. My wife was sick, and I worked all morning and had to take care of them in the afternoon, and I was mentally and physically fatigued, and I was like, I can't do this. And so I took some time, just like 10 minutes, just like, hey, let me take care of myself. Let me refresh myself. And it really changed the tune for the rest of the day. And so being able to take care of myself allowed me to just be there for my kids. And then after that, it's just taking care of like, hey, my relationship with my wife, that is, God joined us as one when we got married. You know, he didn't join me to my kids. He joined me to my wife. And like, that is who I like said I do with before the Lord of like, hey, we now are one and we're doing this together. And in our oneness, like that's going to, in order to have oneness, it takes a lot of intentionality and a lot of time and a lot of, hey, I got to say no to a lot of other things and prioritize her, you know, get to know her and love her. And as like the Lord does. And then after that, it's like, hey, my kids are more important than playing golf with my buddies. You know, like, hey, I got the invite to go play golf Sunday morning. It's like, nope, like my kids, I need to take them to church this morning. I need to invest the family in what's actually has internal value for them and change that, you know, no more late night Halo video game parties with the friends, you know, had them over once and I was just like, something feels different about this, you know, and I'm like, I got it. And so I was learning, what do I say no to and what do I say yes to and how to prioritize all the different relationships. There was even a time when I'm in the backyard doing yard work with my brother and my dad, and they're giving me a lot of grief for like, you're not around anymore, or you're not doing as like, we don't see you all the time. And I kind of just blew up on them like, guys, I'm trying to figure out and build like my family. You know, I come around once a week. I don't come around 5 times anymore, you know, but everything shifted. And because of that, I was like, hey, you know what would really be good? Like, what do you wish you had when you became a fatherhood? Someone saying like, hey, prioritize God, take care of yourself, prioritize your wife, your kids, and then the rest of it from there, kind of like a waterfall. You're going to probably hit all of them the whole day, maybe some days some day others, but you can always hit God, your wife, and your kids every single day, you know, and pour out into them, and then pray and ask God, like, okay, now, like, where do you want me to go from here? And there's a lot to it there, but that's just the high level.
You know, there's a men's ministry guy by the name of Patrick Morley. He wrote the book, The Man in the Mirror, launched that ministry down in Florida years ago. And he makes this statement. He says, after God, but before all others, your wife should be your priority. And so I love in that one sentence, he says, after God and before all others, your wife. And so it is a good reminder that God is first, and we have to prioritize our wives and our marriages, because the marriage is going to endure beyond the kids. As a matter of fact, you're at a different stage of life. I mentioned that we've got grandchildren now. All 4 of our kids are out of the house. They're financially independent. They're living in different states. And so it's my wife and myself. And so Stacy and I have been married for 34 years. 31 of those years, we've had children at least, if not in the house, orbiting the house, because my daughter was in college. And so our home was still her home, her permanent home. Well, now her permanent home is with her husband. So it's Stacy and me again. And so we will hopefully have 34 more years of just us. And so there are lots of couples that get to this point in life and realize that they have prioritized the children, maybe even idolized their children and their children's activities, and they have neglected each other. And so that's critical advice that you're giving there, to make sure that you invest in your marriage relationship. And another thing comes to mind. There were times when my boys especially would pop off with my wife and kind of get out of line a little bit, and I would remind them that she was my wife before she was their mother, and that that is the way they're going to treat her, that they're going to not disrespect my wife and or their mother. So some interesting things that went on there, and just part of this whole learning experience. So I'm grateful that you're starting off thinking like that and putting some pieces into perspective there. So tools for success. So if you're going to win this way, and we want to win as dads, we want to win at home, we prioritize God, we make sure we prioritize our relationship with our wife, our marriage, and then investing in our kids. So tell us about this section called Tools for Success.
Yes, this is probably one of my favorite sections of the book, because us guys, we're very practical. We're just like, hey, give me a tool, give me something, let me go do something with my hands. And for me, writing this last section of the book was all about that. I'm like, all right, what are some of the tools that I have learned that I've been given, or that I have that I didn't even know I had, and how can I lay it out as something very practical and not just theoretical? And so one of the biggest pieces is community, or I think the title of the chapter is You're Not Alone. And we're not alone in our parenting. We're not alone in being dads. There's dads everywhere, and I've been blessed with not only my dad, I have other men about his age that have poured into me, or I can go and talk to about questions that I have. I have other men who are just a couple years ahead of me that I can lean into and be like, hey, how are you getting through the parenting years? I have a few family members, brother-in-laws, whose kids are just like going into middle school or just about, and I'm like, I'm going to be there before I know it. And I'm like watching them right now. I'm like, hey, what are you guys doing? And I can talk to them. Like, I'm going to eventually get to those struggles that you guys are having. But it's really good to know that I'm not alone. There's people that, and I talked about this, like kind of like a team with where you have like linemen, like a football game. And the people in your world are kind of like your linemen. If you're like the quarterback, you're running, like they're blocking for you, they're making a way, they're helping you get to the end. Whether that's friendships that I talked about, family members, or even like another one is just like counselors. I had a counselor in my life who played a big role in me working through some major issues like in my life, and being able to realize that leaning into people in fatherhood is how we're going to take that next step. We think we can do it on our own. I tend to isolate, or we're like, ask a guy for directions, or tell a guy to ask for directions and he will never do it. It's like, that's how we are. But like in nature, it's like, I can figure it out. I'm going to pull my pants up and I'm going to do it. But I'm like, there's the humility to just actually put yourself out there and say, hey, can you help me? Or you're further down the road than I am. Like, can you speak into this area of my life that I'm dealing with in regards to my wife or my kids? And so realizing like the network of people is a big deal, and that's a very like tangible, practical piece of it. The next part of like spiritual stuff is like we have like this spirit, like we can grow spiritually by looking at some of like the spiritual disciplines. That's a familiar phrase in the Bible. And one of the biggest ones that I love coming to is just like, hey, pray, read, and listen. It's like, talk to your father. If you are having a hard time as a father, talk to the God who made you and made your kids, who blessed you to be on this earth and blessed your kids to be on this earth. Like, he knows everything. Just lay it out for him. Tell him where you're at, what's going on. Read his word. He has like, there is so much wisdom in the book of Proverbs. There is like looking at what did Jesus say and do in the Gospels, and all throughout the Bible. There you can see God's character. You can see stories of humans who messed up or did it right. And there's so much there that God could just speak. Like, I love how it says his word's alive, because it is. It speaks to us. And then like, listen, like when you sit down and you listen to God talk to you, you're like, wow, it's like I'm actually quiet for a couple minutes in my life, and I can hear him like speaking into like what I just talked to him about or just read about, and I'm going to go now and try to apply this in my fatherhood. And so there's other things in there like worshiping and fasting and different spiritual disciplines. But those two things were kind of the biggest pieces that I noticed that I was not leaning into enough when I first became a dad, that I started really leaning into more, and even more. I didn't think there could be more, but even more now that I'm down the road, and I'm like, it's going to just keep growing from there. I'm going to have to start. I'm at that age where my kids are starting to get even to that next step of life where I'm like, now I need to start like sitting down like routinely with some more men of like, okay, now I need really help walking through this next season of life. Can you really do that with me? And leaning more into like, okay, I need to grow spiritually with these spiritual disciplines that God has given us to connect with him. And so I'm excited for this next season and see those grow and take off, but build on the foundation that I discovered.
Awesome. So the mission statement for Noble Warriors says, we serve churches as they equip men to walk with Christ and lead well. So what would it look like for a church to have a strategy and a plan in place to anticipate the needs of a young father like Steven Kolberg, so that you didn't have to figure so much out and there were relationships readily available? What would it look like for you to walk into a church, and I'm asking you to dream about this or to give us some perspective on how could a pastor or a men's ministry leader at a local church anticipate there's going to be a guy like you in the congregation, probably a lot of guys like you if it's a healthy church. And so how could they be prepared to do a great job of coming alongside of you? What type of scenario would that look like?
Man, that's a really good question. Something that has been kind of on my mind around this topic, oddly enough, has been, in my stage of life, you're always busy, for one. And so as me walking into a church, every time walking into a brand new church, and I'm like, hey, I want to get plugged in here. I want to be able to meet some other dads, and link arms and start walking out this fatherhood and like leadership and all that. And even in the midst of being busy, like there's plenty of time to carve out simple coffees, or lunches. But the hard part is we're drawn to people that are like in our same stage of life and are like that look like us, talk like us. It's just natural for us to do that. And I've been challenged recently with the people who have been there and done that for plus years. Those are the people that I want to sit down with, that they have the stories, And so I've noticed, even talking to my dad. So my dad is into retirement, and he's and a couple other people that I know are similar staged, where they got grandkids, kids are way out of the house, they've been doing this for years, but they have so much wisdom and knowledge to pour into. And one of the pieces that you hear sometimes, and my wife actually does a lot of work with elderly people specifically, is they just sometimes feel like after they retire, or if they're not really involved too much in community, like what do they have to offer sometimes? And that's something that they struggle with. And I have learned that especially dads who've just walked that path and are like godly men, and there's tons out there, like they have so much to offer. And so if I'm in a dream scenario, I walk into a church and I'm new, and the men's ministry, or just the men that are there, they know these older, let's say, like kind of like patriarch figures of like, you want to sit down with Todd. Todd is like, he's retired. He has all the time on his hands, but he has the wisdom, for he has seen things, and he cares about you and will invest in you. All of us young 30s, 40s dads or whatever, 20s even, my nephew, it's like, we're just trying to make it every single day. And we need someone who's been there and walked it and is like, hey, you have the time, hopefully. Like, I feel like I'm trying to connect with my friends, but he's changing the poopy diapers just like I am. And we're missing out on the part of like, you don't really have more wisdom than I do in this exact moment of we're in the same stage, And so I've been challenged to like, hey, let me look into finding some men in my life that I've been there and done that, and are just like, hey, I would love to pour into you. And so a dream scenario, walk into a church, you have these older men who are just prepared to just sit down and mentor a few young dads just for a small coffee or a lunch, but you can bring the questions, they can tell the stories, and they can point you to God, and you have someone praying for you, walking with you, and it will check up on you too and say, hey, how's it going? And just that like would mean like a ton, and that would really help. And like, I know that would help a lot in my formation and a lot of the circles that I'm in, because the guys I've heard this story from other people. And so that's kind of a big picture of just what my brain actually has been spinning for a little while now.
I try to live that. I've got 4 guys that I meet with that are young dads on Friday mornings. And so we're walking through life and marriage and the New Testament together this year. We're going to read the whole Bible together next year. But that's part of what I personally am trying to do. But my goal is to see more and more churches and individual guys who are intentional in doing this. Someone has to break the ice. So whether it's the younger man who's willing to approach the seasoned man and say, man, could you help me? I've got a few questions for you. I think it's smoother and more effective if the seasoned man would say, hey, I notice you. I remember when I was at your stage of life. I remember I didn't think we were ever going to sleep through the night again. Sex was non-existent. My wife is struggling. I'm struggling. Work's got me going crazy. We're outnumbered at home because now we have 3 kids. And I just remember those days, and it makes me chuckle when I see you. Could I buy you a cup of coffee? I would love to see some guys step into a conversation like that, and they might get rejected from time to time, but I believe there is a whole host of young dads who would say, wow, that would bless me. I would love that. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. And kind of to your point earlier, I think we got to get off our high horse of pride and recognize like, hey, you know what? That sounds like a great idea, instead of like, hey, I'm okay. It's like, we got to stop. I do this all the time. So I'm preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
I can specifically remember a time in mine. I'm like, I think this guy was trying to break the ice with me. And I kind of was like, shoot. And I'm like, oh, big regret. But luckily he's still in my life and I can go back and fix that,
And so I would say to a seasoned man who's listening and just heard that, be okay with the rejection, but be persistent.
Absolutely.
And don't, when some guy says, no, I'm okay, I would even say, nah, I've been where you are. You're not okay about 50% of the time. There's a pot boiling over somewhere in your life, and I'd just like to hear about it and reminisce a bit. I don't know, but I think we could equip some seasoned men to lean into that with a little bit more vigor and kind of press their way into the lives of some younger men. And it might be awkward at first, but if you could sit down and this is not about a Bible study. I don't think we need another Bible study. I think we need guys to sit down across from each other and say, hey, tell me your story. What's going on? What's a high point this week? What's a low point? One of my things is I'll often say to guys, generally in marriage, you're either in the middle of a storm or you're coming out of a storm or you're heading into a storm. So what's the latest storm, friend? You don't have to give me all the details, but what's a source of tension in your marriage? Because I can guarantee you I've had tension in my marriage in the same way. And so if we could coach guys to be that raw, I think it would open some doors for real conversation that would bless both the seasoned man and the younger man. Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely. The gift of being able to just to sit down and, like you said, we don't need another Bible study. We don't need another book study. We just want to be seen. We want to be heard. Yeah. And we just want to know someone's like there. I loved how you said a second ago, be persistent. And that is like what I would need is just like, hey, this guy keeps coming back and keeps handing me. I'm like, hey, I'm in, man. Let's go sit down and have some coffee, even if it's 30 minutes, one small story. Like, thanks for sitting down with me, because the relationship will only grow from there.
Right.
Absolutely.
I love it. All right, one more question. Give me a quick response to this. How has your wife done with your ups and downs and stumbles and fumbles of learning how to be a dad?
Oh, I married an angel, man. The amount of grace that pours through her to me is unheard of. Great story here. About 6 months ago, maybe, I blew up on the kids, and not my finest hour at all. Anger, control, and stuff. My wife, she so graciously comes to me like, "Hey, I got this. You need to go take a break." I'm like, "Okay, you're right. Like, I know she's right." So I go out and sit outside, and I just start reminiscing about the situation and stuff, And then we follow up again, and she doesn't like bash me. She doesn't call me like out. She calls me, as I like to say, she calls me to something of like, hey, this is where you want to be. And she doesn't come and shame me. She doesn't do anything. She encourages me and brings so much grace in the correction of like, you got to think about this, and that is such a blessing to have in my life, because the tape is on repeat where I screw up and mess up, and her feelings get hurt on certain things, absolutely, because she's human. I screw up, people get hurt, but she doesn't let her hurt ever like come against me of just like, hey, let me drag you back, let me hurt you back. She's like, hey, I want you to be stronger, and like, so just pointing me back to God in love and grace over and over and over again. And I think that's that over and over piece is what's really special, because it's easy to do it for the first couple of years, but as it just keeps going, I'm like, God, thank you so much for my wife and the gift that she is. And like getting to pursue God together with her is such a great treat. But man, is she full of grace and joy and love towards me, and even when I screw up. And so she's probably going to listen to this. So I just definitely want to give her a shout out for that, of like, absolutely, I'm a blessed man.
That's awesome. I would agree that my wife has extended tremendous grace to me. And I got to tell you something else that you will realize more and more as your family grows and gets older, that your wife will have insights about your daughters that never occurred to you. And so if you think you need to listen to her now, wait until they're 13 and 11, and you will really need to listen to her, because she will be the wisest person in the world to help you figure that out. So free advice for you, Steven. So
I'll go write that one down, save this episode. I'm going to come back to that.
There you go. All right. Well, great stuff. Steven, thanks for joining us today. I think I've got your website up here. Revivedbrand.com is one of your websites. Have you got another one that's specifically for the book? It's Revived Fatherhood.
revivingfatherhood.com is straight for the book. The ministry side is therevivebrand.com.
Great. Well, it's been wonderful to have you here, Steven. Thank you for sharing your story and your the wisdom that you're gaining and growing here, and the insights about what it looks like to be a good and godly dad and man here, especially with the idea of being able to look to our earthly Father and see what perfection looks like. So appreciate your time here, friend.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoy getting to sit down and talk with you, and I got to definitely keep emailing you and reaching out because I know you're full of wisdom, and I know that you can give me little tidbits when I need it. So thank you.
It's my joy. So we're having a great fun encouraging churches to disciple men well. So thanks so much. Well, folks, thanks for joining us for this episode of the Noble Man Podcast. I hope it's been a blessing to you. And listen, if you're a young dad, check out Steven's book, Reviving Fatherhood. Begin to follow him and learn about his journey as a young dad. But if you're a seasoned man, could I encourage you to follow some of the advice or the ideas that we just talked about? And that is to reach into the life of a young man. Invite yourself in. You know, I love the neighbors that just invite themselves into the house. And so as a young dad, we need some guys who have the courage to invite themselves into our lives. So would you invite yourself into the life of a young dad and ask him how you can encourage him, and you can listen to him, you can see him, you can bless him. I think you'll find that as you seek to bless someone else, you will be blessed yourself. So thanks again, folks. We'll see you next week with another episode of the Noble Man Podcast. God bless you.